Hey everyone, I'm David, and this is Android Police. Today we're going to be talking about the HTC One M8, specifically our video review of it. This is one of the first video reviews we've done in a while, so go easy on me here, but I would love to hear your feedback, your criticism. Keep it remotely respectful, or don't. But anyways, we're going to try to be doing more videos like this in the future, so I just wanted to get that out there before we go ahead and get started here. The HTC One M8 is the follow-up to HTC's hit smartphone last year, the One M7. The M7 and M8, of course, refer to the code names of the devices internally, which HTC has now decided to use publicly for whatever reason, because they didn't want to change the name of the phone. So now we've got, instead of an all-new HTC One, it's the HTC One M8, and last year's phone is the HTC One M7, or I guess you'd call them the 2013 versus the 2014, the new one, the old one. Although if there's another one next year, then that gets kind of confusing. But I guess the M7, M8, and then maybe next year M9 thing does make sense then. So speaking of sense, now the first thing you're going to notice about the One M8 is the fact that it looks very similar to the One M7. Now there are some differences here though. HTC's really been talking a lot, especially about the new unibody chassis. Last year's HTC One didn't technically have a true unibody aluminum chassis. There were actually little plastic strips that ran along the back and sides of the phone that broke up the aluminum. This gave the phone something of a sharp feel, and this year HTC's fixed that. The entire phone is just one piece of aluminum. So that aluminum chassis runs from the sides of the phone all the way around the back and wraps all the way around. There aren't any breaks in it. Those lines you see on the phone actually aren't pieces of plastic. They're just painted on there. So they're totally decorative, which is interesting. Otherwise, the looks are basically a lot like what you saw in the One M7 last year, just more refined. The phone feels better in your hand, it's softer, it's more inviting. And I think that's pretty important, actually. And HTC's definitely been talking a lot about it. You may not care, but some people do. So I think that's definitely something worth pointing out. Apart from that fresh chassis, what really is new on the outside of the HTC One M8? Well, for one, HTC's ditched a somewhat awkward volume rocker they had on the old M7. It was a square piece of metal that was flat and kind of wide. It just wasn't very easy to use. The power button is also not nearly as recessed into the body as the old phone, which I think makes a big difference. It's a lot easier to press it now. Same goes for the volume rocker. It also sits a little higher up, so it's easier to feel out the buttons, which was, I think, kind of a real nuisance on the old One M7. Look to the front of the phone and you'll see something pretty familiar, HTC's trademark boom sound speakers, but you'll also notice a lack of hardware capacitive buttons. This is HTC's first high-end phone with virtual navigation buttons, which is really good, I think, because that's just kind of the way Android's headed recently. Now, that HTC's finally adopted them means that really the only one that still hasn't of the very large phone manufacturers is Samsung. So, what about the display? HTC got a lot of accolades last year for their Super LCD 3 on the One M7, and that screen has actually made a return on the One M8. Unfortunately, it's made a return in the very literal sense of it seems to be the exact same display, just 0.3 inches larger, mostly to make room for those virtual navigation buttons. As far as brightness, color tones, viewing angles go, it is almost indistinguishable from the one on the M7, and I'm being completely serious when I say that. It actually seems slightly dimmer, but that could just be variation between two different units I have. I'm not sure. As I was talking about earlier, the boom sound speakers have made a return once again on the One M8. These speakers are still class leading. You're not going to hear better speakers on a phone. They really do sound great, at least compared to everything else out there. Not to say there's a whole lot of competition in that area, but it does set the One M8 apart from any other smartphone that's really on the market right now, or has been on the market in the last few years, really, to be honest about it. So you're still going to love the boom sound speakers. They've dropped the Beats branding, which we all know really didn't mean anything in the first place. They've replaced it with Boom Sound branding, so you now have a Boom Sound switch instead of a Beats switch. It does the exact same thing. You're not going to notice the difference. Thankfully, the Boom Sound switch now cannot be disabled when the Boom Sound speakers are playing, because there was really no reason to have it disabled when they were playing, because they just sounded better when that switch was on. One of the features that HTC has been showing off pretty extensively on the M8 are the new gesture wake-ups. Double tap it and it turns on. There are also other gestures. Slide up, slide right, and slide left. Now, the problem is that because there are 4 ways you can turn on the One M8 with your fingers, you're likely to do so accidentally sometimes, especially when you're putting the phone in your pocket or pulling it out of your pocket. The other thing about the gestures on the One M8 is the reliability. I find they work between 70 and 90% of the time for me. I know when the G2 came out and it had knock-on, I said in my review it worked maybe 2 out of 3 times for me, and people said I was crazy and that it worked every time for them, and I'm sorry, I just don't believe that. So, the camera. There's been a lot of talk about the Duo camera on the One M8, obviously because it's got 2 freaking cameras on the back of the phone. In reality, I've not really found much use for it. I'm really disappointed HTC decided to do this kind of wacky camera setup instead of actually making a camera that's better. The ultra pixel camera is an interesting idea, but being stuck at 4 megapixels means you basically get no crop room in your photos, and the fine detail is just not very good on anything but macro shots. That said, the ultra pixel camera does have its share of fans. When it came out last year, I really liked it. But then as I started seeing other phones come out with much better cameras, I realized, wow, the ultra pixel camera really isn't that good. And the problem on the One M8 is that the camera actually isn't any better. HTC is using what appears to be the exact same sensor from the M7, and they've just tuned it to be sharper, and the colors are a little more vivid, I guess. The problem is that by making it so much sharper on the processing side, you get these strange chromatic aberrations along fine lines in your pictures, which you can see right here in this image that I've highlighted, those little purple pixels on the tree branches. It basically says to me that HTC is actively compromising by using this 4 megapixel ultra pixel sensor. I just don't think it's working out for them. Battery life has been pretty good for me. Battery life's always really anecdotal to talk about, and so I won't get too detailed. The One M8 has had better battery life for me than almost any other phone I've used recently, apart from maybe the Note 3. It does get really good battery life for my particular use case, and that could be totally different from yours. You could have the screen on at full brightness all the time, or you could be on Wi-Fi constantly, or you could constantly be in an area with crappy reception. I don't know. So I can't tell you what kind of battery life you'll get. I can tell you the battery life I'm getting is better than what I've come to expect of Android smartphones recently. Definitely better than my old Nexus 5. So, Sense 6.0. It looks a lot like Sense 5.0, but not really. HTC has restyled the UI in a lot of ways. The settings menu, Blink Feed's gotten a pretty big update. The Gallery app, the Camera app, there are a lot of changes. So if you're hoping that Sense 6.0 brought HTC a little closer to stock Android, keep hoping. Unfortunately, that's just really not what happened. One nice thing they've done is they've taken some of the stock apps, like the Zoe app, which is coming soon, the Blink Feed app, a few other apps, and they put them on the Play Store, as Motorola has done and as Sony has done, which I think makes a lot of sense, because you're able to update those things separate of having to do a firmware update on the phone, which, as we all know in the US, is a long and painful process. Otherwise, the software feels very much like Sense 5.0 to me. If you're coming from another HTC phone with Sense 5.0, you'll feel very at home. It's on Sense 6.0. It really isn't all that much different. Performance-wise, the One M8 is really, really snappy, I have to say. I'm really excited that HTC's made it so much faster than the old phone. A lot of the phones from last year, especially with Snapdragon 600 chips, really didn't hold up well under the weight of upgrades and later phones that were significantly quicker. So I'm glad to see Snapdragon 801 and KitKat have really kicked things in the high gear again. So as some people will doubtless be happy to know, HTC has added an SD card slot back to the One M8. It just pops out with the little SIM pop tool that you do for the SIM card on the other side. And yeah, you can have a micro SD card in your One M8, which was not something that was featured on the One M7, at least not in America. I believe there's a Chinese version that did have a SIM card slot. So some people are definitely going to be happy about that. I imagine most of those people are on the internet and use internet commenting systems. But hey, you can't argue with having more places to put your stuff. So that's always good. So what do I really like about the One M8? I love the fact that I think it's a beautiful phone. I think it's really good looking. I think HTC is designing the best looking Android phones out there still, even though the design is largely reminiscent of the One M7, but it feels much more elegant and refined and mature than the One M7 did. It's also very fast. The screen is still very good. I wouldn't say it's as good as what you're going to get on the Galaxy S5, but it's a very good screen. I love that HTC moved to, in the first place, software navigation buttons, which definitely makes a lot of sense considering how many phone manufacturers are doing that now and how integral it really is to being a part of Android. You free up that extra real estate on the phone, although admittedly, they did just put an HTC logo where the old buttons were, which kind of doesn't really jive with the idea of saving space, but you win some, you lose some, I guess. What don't I like about the One M8? Number one's got to be the camera. Some people, will swear by the ultra pixel camera, and I admit freely it takes good macro shots. It really does. As good as anything else out there on the mobile market, and sometimes better. But I think HTC really screwed up with Camera Duo. I don't think they're ever going to be able to really convince us that this is something people actually want and that you're going to get a lot of added utility out of. You can talk about, third-party APIs and eventually getting, more functionality out of it in future updates, yada, yada. But what HTC's shown us out of the box just isn't impressive at all, unfortunately. I just think this was a really bad decision and came from a place of wanting to have something to market as opposed to having something that actually results in a better picture-taking experience. The one takeaway I'd really have about the M8 is that for all of the things that it does very well, it doesn't do anything new that really blows you away. Now, we always say that when new phones come out, but sometimes new phones really do have cool new features that can make you go, wow, that's innovative, that's interesting, that makes me want to buy this phone. And with the One M8, there just isn't anything there that really makes me feel like, oh yeah, I gotta have this. This really makes me want an HTC phone. They have their HTC protection program that protects you against, one display break, and you basically get free insurance for your phone, which I guess cool. Phone insurance is something nobody likes to actually pay for, and a lot of people do break their phones, myself included. But at the same time, there just isn't enough going for HTC right now that I lean strongly in their direction. That's not to say I'm leaning strongly in anybody's direction right now, but HTC probably less than most. I think that if you're in the market for a new smartphone, the One M8 is a totally solid choice. HTC has been reliable about updates, if not necessarily super fast all the time, especially if you're on AT&T or Verizon. They've been definitely slower getting the updates out to devices on those networks, but that shouldn't be news to you. If you're looking for an upgrade from an M7, I don't think it's really going to be worth it for you. If you're looking for an upgrade from an older smartphone, though, it's definitely an option. If you were to ask me Galaxy S5 or One M8, I personally would probably go S5. We're going to have a review of that phone up pretty soon. But that's not to say the M8 is a bad phone. It's definitely not. We're at a point where most of the high-end smartphones are actually really good right now. And that's good for consumers because that means you have a lot of choices and you can choose based on what you want and what you like rather than having to decide, well, this phone actually just isn't very good versus this one is. So you don't have to really worry about that with the One M8. If you're not a fan of the Sense software experience, everybody knows at this point that, hey, you can flash the GPE, the Google Play Edition ROM to your phone or whatever. There are risks to doing that. You could brick it. That really does come down to personal preference. These phones are also great now that it's really hard to just look at one of them and say, this is obviously the best for everybody. And that's really something I should probably try to stress, is that my pain points with the M8 probably aren't going to be necessarily yours. So thanks for watching our video review of the HTC One M8. I'm David Reddick, and this has been Android Police. Boom sound confirmed.